Hello, we are going to start the session. Good morning, everyone. What's the name? The gentleman from Zambia. Do we have Mr. Henrik Mweya from Zambia? Henrik Mweya from Zambia? No. I don't think they're here. Okay, can we have you? Edith and Raul, can you come up front? Yeah. Huh? Okay. Oh, since how many are there on the next one? The next one, we don't have. What's Malay? Malay? Huh? Malay. Yeah. So, and Dauda? Dauda will come, I guess, and then we have Helen. Maybe we'll call Dalbag up front. So let's have you up front. Okay. And then I'm going to get the DP. Okay. Can you be called?
I'll stand by and then I'll give you the thumbs up if it is there. If not, I'll do this.
So join up front. I'm going to call the DP now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, good morning. Wonderful, thank you. Welcome to this event here at the Africa Pavilion of the Africa NDC Hub, launch of our report on doubling down on delivery of Africa's climate priorities, policy recommendations from the Africa NDC Hub. We're going to start straight away And I just want to say that we're going to have interventions in French and English. There are headsets for those who want to listen, who need a headset. There are headsets here, so please help yourself with a headset there. We're going to start straight away. We're going to start with welcoming remarks from the Vice President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Kevin Kariuki, who is the Vice President for Energy, Power, Climate Change, and Green Growth. And then we will go into a keynote address. We're hoping that we'll have our minister from Burkina Faso online. But as you all know, there have been connectivity challenges. We'll see how that goes. And then after that, we'll have our colleagues from Dalberg who are here to introduce the report, our report. That is the main reason why we're here. And then after that, we'll have some fireside type of chat conversations with our guests. We have Edith from IFAD. We have Raul from ECOWAS. We have Christophe from Agence Française. And we have, and we have our colleague from UNFPA, sorry, yes. Chigo from UNFPA, exactly. So this is the panel we'll have for the first session. But before we do that, let's please welcome Dr. Kariuki, please, sir, to make your welcome remarks. Thank you. Yeah, we can press it.
Good morning, everybody. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As most of you would be aware, the Africa NDC Hub was launched by the African Development Bank in 2017 to serve as a collaborative platform for development partners to support African countries in implementing commitments made under the COP21 Paris Agreement. In this regard, nationally determined contributions, and we are all aware of this, NDCs embody efforts by countries to progressively reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change, and are important elements in the global response to climate change. So that means that the NDC hubs covers the entire continent, and it is in recognition of this enormity of this task, that is to support African countries implement commitments made under the COP21 Paris Agreement, that we established the NDC Hub. I therefore commend the 20 development partner institutions that have since joined us on this journey. At this COP, we have heard African leaders articulate the need to accelerate implementation of their NDC commitments through the delivery of climate finance much faster and at scale. We have also heard that global finance is not in short supply, especially from the private sector, but there are issues pertaining to the lack of viable bankable projects and the high risk of investing in Africa. In this regard, our role as development partners is therefore to support African governments deal with these challenges by putting in place mechanisms that enable the flow of finance to support the NDC implementation in Africa. These include developing project pipeline development, policy and regulatory frameworks, and blended finance to de-risk private investments. Accordingly, today's event underscores and celebrates the power of partnerships in accelerating the implementation of Africa's Paris Agreement commitments as articulated in the NDC targets. For a start, acknowledging the paucity in climate finance on the continent, evidenced by the fact that Africa accounts for only 3% of global climate finance, but loses between 5 and 15% of GDP due to climate change impacts, according to the 2022 Africa Economic Outlook. The African Development Bank has committed to transformative projects that aim to accelerate the continent's transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient development. These include the $20 billion Desert to Power project, which seeks to deliver access to clean electricity to some 250 million people through solar power generation, while enhancing the resilience of the 11 countries of the Sahel. The second initiative is the Great Green Wall, which is a continental initiative to plant trees along 8,000 kilometers and a 15-kilometer wide swath across the Sahara. The bank has pledged to contribute $6 billion to fast-track its implementation. The third transformative project that I would like to talk about is the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, which is a joint initiative of the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation that aims to mobilize $25 billion for climate change adaptation action on the continent. On the same vein, and with a view to innovatively increasing access to climate finance, the bank also has a number of tools for de-risking green investments. And these include the $2 billion Africa Growing Together Fund that aims to de-risk Africa's sustainable infrastructure, including, for example, a $50 million co-financing rural electrification facility to address critical energy access deficit and catalyze SDG goal on universal access by 2030 and related reduced reforestation. The second tool that I want to mention is the $2 billion Room to Run guarantee funded by the UK government for climate projects. The guarantee will allow the bank to free up headroom for additional financing for climate projects and in particular for adaptation. The third I want to talk about is Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. This is a $420 million fund, blended finance facility managed by the African Development Bank that prioritizes the development of green baseload as alternative to fossil fuel dependent baseload and offers technical assistance and concessional resources to remove market barriers with a view to accelerating universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy services for all in Africa. A good example, and I think examples here are very helpful, for a SEFA-funded project that meets this criteria is what we call the DRC Green Mini-Grid Development Program that will result in providing electricity access to 500,000 people in East Sea. Moreover, our climate change and green growth strategic framework for 2021 to 2030, approved last year, strives to increase Africa's access to climate finance from current 3% to 10% by 2030. These additional resources should help in building stronger national and sub-national institutional frameworks for the Paris Agreement and SDG 2030 agenda. In addition, there are emerging nature-based solutions for climate finance mobilization, and these include the debt for nature and climate swaps. Though still in early stage in Africa, these financial mechanisms allow portions of a country's foreign debt to be forgiven in exchange for commitments to invest in biodiversity conservation and climate action. For example, Seychelles was able to convert $21.6 million of its national debt via the first world blue economy debt for nature swap. Such initiatives should be replicated in other highly indebted, climate vulnerable, nature-endowed countries. Debt swaps can be a tool to immediate financing needs for conservation and climate adaptation efforts. Another example is the payment for forestry and other ecosystem services that are enshrined in the Paris Climate Agreement and aim to channel money from rich nations to developing world to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. In June this year, Gabon became the first African country to receive payments for reducing emissions through forest protection. Through the Central Africa Forest Initiative, or otherwise called CAFI, Gabon will receive about 150 million over 10 years. Overall, The NDC Hub platform provides a space for each institution to tap into knowledge and resource pool of collective membership to nurture and deliver these emerging initiatives. The Africa Development Bank remains a committed hub partner and looks forward to more interventions that facilitate the delivery of NDC targets in a manner that synergizes climate and development agendas. I wish you fruitful deliberations and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karaoke, for those great welcome remarks. Thank you for highlighting some of the very important issues, the importance of partnership, which is what the NDC Hub is all about. As you said in your intervention, it is a partnership of over 20 organizations. The report that we are here to launch today is based on a partnership of some of the institutions that you will hear very shortly: the Islamic Development Bank, UN Environment, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Agence Française de Développement, African Union Development Agency, the Commonwealth, UNFPA, ECOWAS, the Global Green Growth Institute, and UNDP. So it's already showing that partnership. And this is the second launch. In last year, we were at COP26, where we launched the first report, and then we're now going forward to see how can we now double down. This is the COP of implementation, as you said, VP. And of course, implementation, you need. So how can we double down to make sure, because you made the important case that the finance flows to Africa are very small, only 3% of global climate finance coming to Africa. We need to translate African NDCs into investment plans. Our report is about the policy recommendations that could help to translate those NDCs into investment plans so that the money can flow for implementation, because without money, there's no implementation. And so we have been very proud, I call our partners, but we've been very proud in the first report and the second one to have had Dalberg as a very trusted partner. So I want to please give a round of applause to Dalberg. They've really helped us to do a wonderful job. We did a great report at COP26. Now we are going to hear again today about this follow-up report. And I want to call on my colleagues, Lamnia and Bertrand, to give us a presentation. You have about like 15 minutes, so take your time, because this is very important. We want you colleagues to focus on the key messages, the experiences that you hear from the report. What do you see as lacking? What do you see as some of the issues that could help us to strengthen the report, so that when we finish from here at COP, we're going to produce a report that everybody can find really useful to ensure implementation, to ensure that the cash flows, yeah? Okay, so Lamnia and Bertrand, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linus. And thanks everyone again for joining us this morning for this presentation, which will go over the findings from our report on doubling down on delivering Africa's climate action priorities. My name is Bertrand Assamoah. I'm an associate partner with Dalberg. I'm based in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, and I'm here with my colleague Lamia.
Hi everyone, my name is Lamia El Goutabi and I'm an associate partner based in Dakar, and very happy to be here today with you.
Thank you. So what you see on the screen is a creative illustration that summarizes the findings and insights that we gathered for this report. So this is a first or summary version of the report. A fuller version will be available in December, but already what we've produced will give you a good idea of the direction we're going and the key recommendations, policy recommendations we have for Africa to accelerate its climate action agenda. So our work was done over the past 2 months, and so far, in terms of key points to highlight as far as the context, we know that Africa is the most vulnerable continent to the impact of climate change. And that translates into a loss of 5 to 15% of GDP per year, as VP Karaoke highlighted earlier. We also know that over the recent years, the African economies have also been hit on the economic side by the impact of the COVID pandemic and more recently of the war in Ukraine. and this has led to a 12.2% inflation on the continent, which is the highest it's been in quite a long time. On the flip side, we know that there's a growing trend globally for greening the global economy. And this, associated with the most recent economic disruptions, is creating an environment that actually could favor Africa's green industrialization agenda. And that's part of the components that the Africa NDC Hub and its partners are trying to push as far as the efforts that are being spent to support African countries with their climate change agenda. There's a few key messages that we can highlight as outcomes of this study. The first one, as far as progress made on NDC planning, is that African countries have continued to make steady progress in revising their NDCs, but there's still progress to be made on the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies and with the national adaptation plans. The other thing we can point out on the implementation side, which is the focus of this COP, is that implementation is still being hindered by the lack of finance, which is what Linus was highlighting earlier. So there's still a huge gap in terms of what the continent actually needs to implement those NDCs and what it's actually and what it's getting so far. The two areas we're trying to put forward as key opportunity areas are first around nature-based solutions. As we know, Africa is home to the second largest carbon sink in the world after the Amazon forest. So there's a number of natural ecosystems that are contributing and that have a huge potential in terms of adaptation and mitigation, but that potential is under threat given the growing population on the continent, the increasing pressure on natural resources, because more and more people need to use our natural ecosystems and resources to earn their livelihoods. And the other opportunity area, the other key opportunity area, is around energy access. Energy access, why? Because there's a huge gap in terms of energy access on the continent. Almost half of our continent still needs access to power. But on the flip side, we know that there's a huge amount of capital available to finance large-scale energy projects, which is an opportunity for the continent. Although our key priority as a continent in the face of climate change is on adaptation, most of the funding is available on the mitigation side. And if we recognize that the energy sector is actually a big potential, a big area where we can draw additional funding and capital to support a low carbon future. And in our recommendations, which you'll see in greater detail later, there's three key areas that we're highlighting. The first one around strategic planning and implementation monitoring. The second one around innovative climate finance. And the third one around regional coordination, governance, and programs.
So as we said, most of NDCs were updated, but the development of LTLADs and NAPs remained slow. So far, 47 NDCs have been reviewed by African countries, and showing increase in terms of quality and ambition. For example, the emission reduction target have increased by 6.9% in average. Most NDCs have increased their cost estimates in terms of adaptation and mitigation plan. They are more inclusive of gender and youth for respectively 85% and 70% of them. However, LTLADs and national adaptation plans are slowly developing, with only 5 LTLADs that have been submitted, but 7 that are currently being developed with the support of the Africa NDC Hub partners. For the NAPs, it's 16 NAPs that have been submitted and 34 that are currently being developed. This slow progress in terms of LTLADs and NAPs is mainly explained by the level of complexity of the processes to develop those strategies, and the limited technical skills. This is why the Africa NDC Hub partners are currently providing technical assistance, but also capacity building to countries to help them revise their NDCs, improve NDC-related data system, for example, and improving investment plan as mentioned by Linus before. And of course, reinforcing the alignment between NAPs, LTLEDs, and NDCs, and also implementing them locally. The implementation at scale is hampered by gaps in climate finance. Africa needs 217 billion USD per year to implement its NDCs. In 2020, only 27 billion US dollar were invested. This is partly due to main constraint observed on the supply and demand side. On the demand, what is observed is a limited pipelines of bankable projects being developed for both public and private financing, limited private sector participation and awareness, and on the supply side, it's insufficient public flows of financing, especially to sectors with limited business models, but also a lack and high cost of private financing. So the Africa NDC Hub partners are working across both public and private sectors to develop investable projects. On the public sector side support, they are helping countries in NDC investment plans and projects, but also cascading NDCs in national policy agendas, developing cross-regional climate initiatives. On the other side, for private sector support, it's promoting private dialogue and engagement, but also continuously providing technical assistance to projects and businesses, especially to the most vulnerable ones. But gaps remain to really make projects and initiatives more inclusive and bankable, and to strike a balance between impact and financial returns. So in the meantime, we've seen the Africa NDC Hub partners promoting and fostering innovative ways to scale climate finance flows. To name a few, credit guarantee schemes to de-risk private investment into green projects and bonds in Africa. And as of today, about more than $2 billion US have been invested in those schemes. Green and blue bonds that have a huge potential to raise financing to invest in climate-friendly projects, but they remain untapped opportunities. Indeed, they account only for 0.5% of global volumes. Another key topic that is at his early stage but emerging, and that I'm sure you heard a lot, is debt for nature and climate swaps that have the potential to reduce sovereign debt's burden while investing in climate action. Today, it's about $135 million US that have been done in swaps, but it's still early stage and need to be fostered further to really help climate finance flows in Africa. African natural ecosystems are under threat, yet protecting, managing, and restoring them offers enormous climate and social benefits. For example, scientists have made estimate that the mitigation potential of natural-based solution implementation in Africa could help to sequester and avoid 933 million tons of carbons per year. This could be done through forest protection, forest management, reforestation. And this has a lot of adaptation benefits. And here, just to name a few of them: flood reduction, water filtration, cooling effects, drought mitigation, and of course, socioeconomic benefits. Indeed, 70% of sub-Saharan Africans depend on forests and woodlands for their livelihood. Another important point is that the annual gross marine product of the West Indian Ocean, for example, is estimated at $20.8 billion US, which is the equivalent of the annual GDP of a country. So all the partners are promoting the implementation of a natural-based solution across multiple tiers, regional programs, national planning, fundraising and carbon frameworks, community-level market-based programs to set up and achieve ambitious NBS targets, but also strengthening planning and public finance and developing further the carbon finance frameworks, but also scaling implementation to incentivize community buying. However, gaps remain in terms of political buying, coordination, lessons transfers, and finding proven business models to really help sustainability planning. The energy transition is gaining traction in African NDCs and is a key pathway to meet adaptation and mitigation goals. As we mentioned earlier, 43% of the population on our continent has no electricity access. The adaptation benefits of going towards that path, to name an example, is that energy will power adaptation. For example, solar-powered irrigation helps reduce drought effects and improve agricultural yields, which is a key sector on our continent. The socio-economic benefits, for example, through off-grid solution to electrify health facilities in rural areas, but also education facilities, any type of facilities that can improve the livelihood of people living in those areas. Clean cookstove is another example to reduce respiratory disease for women and children, but also free up time for them to go to school and generate income. A low carbon growth path will help Africa meet NDC goals and compete in a green economy. And this is a huge potential for Africa to develop, but in a low carbon way. And the Africa NDC Hub partners are promoting a variety of pathways to rapidly scale access to clean energy and help the continent to grow towards that low carbon development. For example, through enabling grid-scale investment by promoting standardized and competitive public procurement processes, but also providing technical assistance, de-risking private investment in those projects. It's also about promote green energy-intensive industries through regional programs to develop the energy sectors in most vulnerable countries, but also distributing small-scale clean energy like solar home system, clean cooking solution, distributed productive use appliances. So there is an enormous immediate opportunity to crowd in private sector financing, improving livelihoods and resilience in a low carbon way.
So as far as key recommendations for the implementation of the NDCs on the continent, we came up with 12 of them, which we grouped in 3 key categories. The first one, which is focused on the strategic planning and implementation monitoring efforts, includes 5 recommendations, but there's 2 or 3 I'm going to highlight here, notably around the need to cascade NDCs into other national development agendas. So it's one thing to do the planning at the NDC level, but it's critical to make sure that those plans are embedded in other economic development plans for our countries to make sure that climate action is mainstreamed across sectors and not just at the national level, but also at the subnational and local level. Another point to highlight is the need to strengthen the inclusion of the most vulnerable. And that includes youth, women, informal workers, and indigenous communities, which are most heavily impacted by the effects of climate change. And also the need to increase transparency and use and implement MRV systems, which are critical for our countries to be able to keep track of the progress and the difficulties they're facing when implementing the NDCs, so that corrective measures can be implemented along the way. On the climate finance side, as we said earlier, we know that there's a huge financing gap. And we know that the funding is not going to come, or most of the funding is not going to come exclusively from governments or from the international community. A significant portion of it will have to come from the private sector. So it's extremely important to focus on private sector project models in order for the private sector to find more effective ways to provide funding for Africa's NDC projects. We also need to recognize the sovereign fiscal debt constraints faced by the most climate vulnerable countries. As we know, most LDCs, so the least developed countries, tend to have the most difficulty and to pay the highest interest rates on their loans, which is very unfortunate and counterintuitive in some ways, because these are the countries that actually need the funding the most. So specific interventions need to be implemented in order to focus specifically on those countries which are not getting the funding they need, although they're the ones who would benefit from it the most. And also, we have an opportunity to unlock carbon finance. So this is a relatively new tool, but it's one that Africa can significantly benefit from, given the fact that, as I said earlier, we're already playing a significant role. Our natural ecosystems are already playing a significant role in carbon sequestration, in carbon avoidance. So we should be able to leverage this tool in order to access the funding we need in order to facilitate investments in green energy and in adaptation projects and so on. And as far as regional coordination and governance, we have an opportunity to strengthen regional and continental lenses associated with climate action. And that applies to a number of continent-wide activities and programs, such as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or the African Union's Green Recovery Action Plan, which we believe can significantly benefit from incorporating a green economy component. And lastly, what I'll highlight is the opportunity to provide coordination, learning, scaling, and replicating of successful models at the continental level. And this is another area where regional and continental institutions can play a key role in making sure that, African countries, there's 54 of us, some are more advanced than others in different areas, but we need to find better ways to share information, to share lessons learned, best practices, and learn and accelerate the progress we're making on implementing our NDCs together. So this puts an end to our presentation. As I said earlier, the goal for this report is really to highlight progress and challenges faced by African countries, but also how the Africa NDC Hub and its partner institutions are supporting African countries with their NDC plans and implementation. We're going to pursue this work post-COP to incorporate key outcomes from the conference and potential additional interventions and opportunities that can accelerate the climate action agenda for Africa. So look out for the first report, which will be released tomorrow, and the full report, which will be available in mid-December. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Bertrand and Lamnia, for that. Please, one more round of applause for the. We see a very rich content of the report that you produced. So many issues there, and it's so great the way you have been able to group the 12 recommendations into 3 key areas that help us to really see the big picture of what is happening. It's good that you mentioned about some of the key opportunity areas, like nature-based solutions, and you talked about debt for climate swaps. In fact, we need to talk about debt for climate investment. Yeah, because I think when we talk about debt for climate swaps, they may not really understand, or people may not really see what it's meaning. But I think debt for climate investment is really key. And as you would have seen, we've also done quite a lot of work at the Economic Commission for Africa to support countries in this area, because this is a very growing area, and there's a lot of demand and interest there, and this is where some of the transformation can happen. And also thank you for highlighting the area of energy as one of the biggest areas on how we can, because you talk about the perpetual problem where the people who have the money say, oh, we have the money, but we can't find projects. And the countries have got all the big projects and say we can't find the money. And in fact, prior to COP, the COP climate champion, Dr. Mahmoud, who was in Addis Ababa trying to also address this issue, particularly together with the G-Funds members. And he's from Egypt. And he says from the village where he grew up, you always had these guys who say they can ride a camel. Then when you bring a camel and say, this is a camel ride, then there's an issue. So we really need to be able to resolve this issue that we no longer hear people say we have money, we can't find projects, we have projects, we can't find money. And that's why the NDC hub partners were all working in various ways to try to help countries to translate the NDCs into investment plans. And energy is one of the best ways of doing that because in terms of bankability, and we've seen evidence. At the Economic Commission for Africa, we launched something called the SDG 7 Initiative for Africa 2 years ago. And last year, we already facilitated through that initiative the issuance of green bonds to South Africa by PIMCO for 3 billion rand in local currency. That's where money can come from. And that initiative was saying that you need to look at how can you start with a sustainability dimension, so revise your NDCs so that you have more bankable energy projects. But one of the things that we didn't talk about and I would like to hear about is governance, because the second pillar of our initiative was governance. So focus on sustainability, more ambition with NDCs, address governance issues. Then the third pillar, which is finance, should happen because, as you see, they say, seek ye first the kingdom, and all this shall be. Address sustainability, remove the governance barriers to investment, then the finance should flow. And this is what we're trying to do with the NDC Hub report that we're publishing here, that we need to see how can we get this to happen. So thank you really very, very much for summarizing a very complex report into something that we could readily understand. We now have with us some of our partners to give more insights, additional insights into what they have heard. So maybe let me start with Edith from IFAD. So Edith, you are a partner of the NDC Hub. IFAD is a major contributor. You've contributed content like all the partners and so on. So based on what you've heard, what else is there that you feel we need to look into? What issues could we additionally look into to make this report? And I think, Bertrand and Lamne, you mentioned that only 5 countries have done the long-term low emission development strategies. Which are those countries, and why is it that there is not much mileage, or there's a lot of inertia in that area? So Edith, some insights from you, please.
Thank you very much, Linus. My name is Edith Kirumba. I'm an environment and climate specialist, and I work with IFAD. IFAD has been very keen to embrace the Paris Agreement, and a lot of our programming is now focused on ensuring that we are Paris aligned. How IFAD has done this is by, through the IFAD replenishment cycles, increasing the focus on climate. Under IFAD 11 replenishment cycle, our focus was on having 25% of our program of loan and grants being climate focused, meaning having resources allocated to climate adaptation and mitigation in all our programming. And now under IFAD 12, our ambition has increased. We are now at 40%. So we have the ambition to ensure that 40% of our program of loan and grants is actually focused on climate adaptation and mitigation. And we do this by working very closely with the different governments that we work with and ensuring that their NDCs and NAPs are integrated into our programming cycle through the different country strategy programs, country strategy papers, as well as through the project designs. Another way that IFAD is doing this is through the private sector window. So we are working very closely, with the Green Climate Fund, and also through the Global Environment Facility private sector windows to leverage additional funds for climate adaptation and mitigation in order to enhance, the countries that we work with, their response to their NDCs and the NAPs. So to this end, IFAD has got 2 major flagship programs. We have the iGreenfin project that is being implemented in 12 African countries. It's now at the stage of being crafted in the phase 2, and phase 1 has started the early parts of implementation. And then we also have the adaptation for rural climate finance mechanism. This one is a 300 million project. leveraging on innovative financial solutions and working across 9 countries in the East and Southern Africa region. So we are mainly working with 2 host banks, the Equity Bank in Kenya and also the Stanbic Bank in South Africa, so targeting 9 countries. Then another non-sovereign operation that we are working on is through a grant that IFAD has provided through our normal resources, and we are working with different countries. Rwanda is one of them, to really implement, to help countries meet their NDCs and NAPs. IFAD is also exploring the carbon markets through our programming, also to feed all of that back into the meeting of the targets of NDCs and NAPs. So how can IFAD support the NDC partnership? So number one, we are very keen to work with the NDC partnership. We've seen a lot of benefits to working with the partnership. One of the ways we've benefited a lot is through the MDB methodology, the Multilateral Development Bank methodology that helps us to track the climate finance that we provide to the various projects through our program of loan and grants, and this we do at design. So that tool has been very helpful also for us to understand how we are channeling climate finance within our program of loan and grants. So what the added value that IFAD brings to this, because we work within the agriculture space and with rural smallholder farmers, we feel that there's a need to strengthen the focus on agriculture within the NDCs and to cost those, those commitments accurately. So IFAD is keen to support, the strengthening of the focus of agriculture within the NDCs and also the costing of the various targets and activities, as well as to support, the provision of knowledge and sharing it from what we are learning from our different operations across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith, for sharing those insights from the IFAD perspective. I would now like to turn over to you, Chigozie, to give us from the United Nations Population Fund perspective, what are some of the insights, particularly looking at some of the innovations that could come into helping translate the NDCs into investment plans. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks, colleagues, for really already stating a lot of real insights from the NDC review. For UNFPA, we did review 111 NDCs, 46 of them from the African region, and our interests are around gender integration, SRHR, human rights, health, young people, and vulnerable people, and the interconnections. We did this review in 2021, just a smaller one, about 50 countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa. And from what we find in the review of the updated NDCs, as you already saw in the summaries, that there's, of course, progress on a lot of fronts. For example, now we have 44 of the 46 reviewed mentioning substantially gender. We have about 17 of them referencing sexual reproductive health and rights, highlighting the impacts on people, especially women and girls. And then we have more integration of adaptation components into the NDC, with even increasing budget lines. Are these enough? No. We see that in some of the areas, for example, in areas, for example, gender, SRHR, youth engagement, some of the references do not have budget lines. And this is critical. When you have an NDC, you have to look at what it's budgeted for, especially when you're talking about transitioning into an investment plan. Investors want to look at what are the costed options on the NDCs, where are they supporting, where is their funds going to. So when you have things enumerated in the NDC and there are no budget lines for them, it may appear that they probably will not be priority for the government. And it's important for the partners to or investors to understand that these are priorities and budget lines should accompany them. There's a lot of impacts that we see across Africa, and these NDCs are increasingly reflecting those, especially about people, because at the center of this are the people who are at the front lines in the communities who are facing the impacts. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of finance, but the people who are hardest hit. Of course, it's on the news often about the floodings in some parts of West Africa. In Nigeria, where I come from, over 600 people have died. It's about these people, the pregnant women, children who cannot escape the disproportionate impact of climate change in their communities, we have to put them at the center of the design of this document. In transitioning to the investment plans, how do we accompany countries to be able to really implement and to be able to enhance their national documents? We did work with some countries, especially in the Eastern and Southern African region, to strengthen their indices, to provide support where it's needed, and with the partners also in the NDC Support Hub, we're looking forward to support even more countries that may need help, especially in strengthening the intersection areas of their national adaptation plan, of their NDCs around gender, around sexual reproductive health and rights, youth, human rights, health system strengthening, protection systems, education systems. We will look forward to increasingly support countries in this area. And again, of course, we are working also with partners here, especially the African Development Bank, to even do more gender transformative adaptation work across the countries of interest who have reflected this in their national determined contributions. We take a multi-pronged approach to do our work around adaptation and resilience, which is our focus, around empowering population, around closing the data gap, doing vulnerability assessments, which is incredibly important for countries to be able to disaggregate data by sex, by gender, by age, to help have more targeted policies that really have impact on the lives of the people on the ground, and as well to really reduce risk through enhanced early warning systems. I hear this has been highlighted a lot here, especially also by the United States President, but also the UN Secretary General during his speech, that early warning system is absolutely important to assist countries to plan ahead of time and to avert the biggest consequences of climate change. And we look forward to working with more partners at the NDC Support Hub to do even more.
Thank you so much, Chigo, for making those very important points, for highlighting the importance of and we heard in the presentation about enhanced gender actions in the NDCs as a way of building resilience. And also thank you for this last point about the early warning systems. That with in fact, the UN, the Secretary General has just started the process where we want to support every country to ensure that they have early warning systems, because early warning systems are very critical towards building resilience, towards adapting. And you also mentioned about vulnerability, and it's also good because it helps us to see that, you know, when we started climate response discussions and so on, the main focus was vulnerability assessment. And then we shifted over to adaptation, right? And then from adaptation to mitigation, but now it's resilience, because resilience is everything. We need to understand vulnerabilities. We need to see the core benefits that Bertrand and Lamina talked about, that is no longer like mitigation versus adaptation, but whichever one is an entry point towards resilience, because everything points towards resilience. So thank you very much for sharing those points. So and I'd like to turn over to Mr. Raul Kawame from ECOWAS. I think in the presentation, Lamina, you mentioned, or Bertrand, you mentioned about the AfCFTA, which is about, the Africa Continental Free Trade, but it's bringing in the regional dimension. And I think one of the things that we have not really talked about is, could we, because as ECOWAS, you're a major stakeholder because you have so many countries working together. So is there an opportunity to now see how NDCs could be looked upon, especially in terms of building resilience from a regional perspective? Because this will be extremely important. And how does ECOWAS see adaptation and resilience building in the NDCs?
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Raul Kwame. I'm program officer at the ECOWAS Commission. As you mentioned, at the regional level, ECOWAS also is working with the NDC Hub since the beginning, in collaborating with all the partners to support our member states. As you know, also ECOWAS is covering 15 countries in West Africa. So we have been supporting our countries in, since the initial NDCs till the revised NDCs. And for the implementation of NDCs, also we have been with the countries to support them in their processes. So we have been, since I think 3 years now, supporting the countries in terms of developing their capacities to access green climate fund. We are being able to build their capacities and put in place in each of the 15 member states a pool of experts on how to design and develop climate projects, so that from the perspective of at the national level, all the stakeholders can support the NDAs, the national designated authorities, to initiate projects and also to facilitate, in order to facilitate the mobilization of finance to implement the NDCs. We also, since 2019, initiated also at the regional level a support to the countries to, as you know, data is very important in terms of developing climate action. So we're able to support all the 15 countries in putting in place what they call national climate services. National climate services is meant to at least develop some climate services which is to target the need of the end users. So we are able to support all the countries so that they can have the data in implementing the NDCs and then putting in place all the action to tackle climate change. As you know, also in the region, in the report, it was also mentioned that we don't have more countries who have already developed the NAPs. So it's a process also we are ongoing in supporting the country for them also to develop, and as they have all the 15 countries, they have revised and submitted the NDCs. I want also to point out an initiative we put in place is a West African initiative on climate smart agriculture. Is a kind of mixed financing which aim to help the small farmers. As you know, for the small farmers to get access to funding is very difficult. So this initiative is 80% is managed by the ECOWAS Bank for Development and Investment in order to support these small farmers to have access to some funding so that they can also have some projects on adaptation so that they can also deal with climate change. As you know, agriculture is a vulnerable sector for the region, so that we need to also adapt. So this initiative is ongoing. So we partner with all the partners at the in the NDC partnership, in NDC hub, for us to also share the experience from the other region and other partners, so that we can build our action based on the experience from the other countries. And also to holistically support our countries, we just developed a climate change strategy with the new tool for the region to gather and also put all the partners and all the regional institutions together to support the countries in implementing the NDC where they have already submitted. So this is most of the action we are doing in the region, and then in partnership with all the partners, member of the NDC hub. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raul, for sharing those perspectives, and hopefully we can understand a little bit more why countries are struggling with the NAPs, struggling with the development of their long-term strategies, and also how countries can begin to think together to look at some of those actions that they could put in their NDCs from a regional approach, which could actually help also to mobilize financing. So I want now to turn over to you, Christophe, who is a climate change adaptation expert at the Agence Française, the French Development Agency. So you have money, I think. But we know, we've been talking here about adaptation or adapting to build resilience. And we heard in the presentation about bankability, bankable projects, and so on. Is building resilience, is resilience bankable? And what is Agence Française doing to support countries with adaptation and resilience?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation. How many of you don't speak French or don't understand French? Okay, many of you. I invite you to take a headphone because my intervention will be in French, though I could do it in English, but I think that Africa is also francophone, so it's a nice area to speak French here. I'll say a few words in English about the general landscape. We really enjoyed working with the Africa NDC Hub. I think that this network is really instrumental in trying to gather everybody and to coordinate everybody. And congratulations for this report that my colleague Iman accompanied also with you. So now in French. L'Agence française de développement nourrit de grandes ambitions en ce qui concerne le climat, puisque, vous le savez peut-être, parmi le portefeuille d'affaires de 10 milliards d'euros annuels l'an dernier, 50% de ce volume était dédié à des projets à co-bénéfice climat, atténuation et adaptation, donc 50%, ce qui fait 5 milliards. Et parmi ces 5 milliards d'euros, 2 milliards étaient dévolus à l'adaptation, donc des projets à co-bénéfice adaptation. Donc, ce qui représente une grande avancée, puisque quand moi je suis arrivé à l'AfD en 2016, en moyenne, on était autour de 400 millions d'euros de projets à co-bénéfice adaptation, donc une multiplication par 5 en quelques 6 années. Parmi, en plus en fait, de ce volume d'affaires, on dispose d'outils spécifiques. Donc, par exemple, Expertise France, au sein du groupe AfD, accompagne la CEDEAO, donc ECOWAS, avec un financement européen dans le programme GCCA+, Afrique de l'Ouest, pour soutenir l'élaboration de la stratégie régionale et mettre en œuvre des programmes sur le terrain qui ont été cités par Raoul. L'Agence française de développement dispose aussi de la facilité 2050 pour soutenir le développement de stratégies de long terme sur l'atténuation et l'adaptation, ou d'autres outils spécifiques aux villes, par exemple Cyclia. Et de mon côté, en fait, j'ai le plaisir de travailler sur ce programme Adaptation qui accompagne 12 à 18 pays partenaires depuis 2017 sur uniquement les dimensions adaptation des CDN. Il y a un certain nombre d'enjeux qu'on traite qui ont été cités précédemment. Donc il y a tout d'abord l'investissement, pour répondre à votre question. On a un axe 3 qui reste au cœur de notre projet qui rentre en phase 2 actuellement. Durant la première phase de 2017 à 2022, au travers de cet axe 3 investissement, on a suscité l'émergence de plus de 580 millions d'euros de projets financés par l'AfD ou cofinancés par l'AfD, le Fonds vert ou l'Union européenne. Donc au travers d'études de vulnérabilité ou des études de faisabilité. Pour cette phase 2, on a souhaité opérer au travers d'un triptyque comprendre, planifier, investir, à la fois pour inscrire ces projets dans une vision de plus long terme qui traite à la fois de la gouvernance et de la planification des politiques publiques, mais aussi au niveau au-dessus, entre guillemets, dans les savoirs, et je pense que ça a été cité, les savoirs sont importants. L'axe 2 donc, va poursuivre le travail entrepris sur la précédente phase au travers d'un soutien à l'adaptation dans les dispositifs de gouvernance et de planification. Sur la gouvernance, par exemple, au Sénégal, on a accompagné le pays pour élaborer un système de suivi et évaluation des CDN, donc avec comme point d'entrée le ministère de l'Environnement qui, bien sûr, est en lien avec l'ensemble des ministères sectoriels qui mettent en œuvre des projets climat et des projets d'adaptation. Sur les politiques publiques, on a accompagné le Niger pour renforcer la place de l'adaptation dans un document qui pourra nourrir la future stratégie de développement agricole au niveau national, et avec un certain nombre de projets, un plan d'action pour développer des projets. Donc, ce qui est nouveau pour cette phase 2, c'est l'axe 1, comprendre, qui vise à soutenir des travaux de recherche opérationnelle sur les dimensions humaines du climat. C'est directement en lien avec des conclusions du tout dernier rapport du GIEC, du groupe 2, qui a deux tournants. Un tournant social, donc qui nous amène à traiter mieux ces dimensions humaines du climat au travers de cet axe 1, en prolongement d'un financement qu'on a déjà opéré en phase 1 auprès de l'IDRI, l'Institut du développement durable et des relations internationales, pour créer un outil de mesure des progrès de l'adaptation qui va être extrêmement intéressant dans le cadre ici des discussions sur le Global Stocktake et le Global Goal for Adaptation. Le deuxième tournant du GIEC, qui a peut-être été moins perçu que d'autres choses qui ont été majeures, qui ont été bien retransmises de ce rapport. Ce deuxième tournant, c'est le fait qu'ils joignent beaucoup mieux les enjeux d'écosystèmes et de population. C'est quelque chose dans la foulée des travaux de l'IPBES qui est marquant et qu'on a souhaité aussi nous intégrer dans le cadre d'adaptation avec comme objectif principal soutenir la résilience des écosystèmes et des populations, et c'est quelque chose qu'il reste à construire. Par ailleurs, on a deux composantes transversales, une composante genre et inclusion sociale. On avait eu le défaut d'inscrire le genre uniquement en phase 1, et là on veut vraiment joindre genre et inclusion sociale parce que les deux marchent de pair, et aujourd'hui c'est le Gender Day. On va présenter un certain nombre de résultats dans le pavillon IDFC, donc sur adaptation, notamment sur le Sénégal. Et on est doté maintenant d'un budget spécifique au sein du projet et d'un Gender Action Plan avec des indicateurs. Seconde composante transversale qui est extrêmement importante, le knowledge management, la gestion des savoirs. Ça sonne mieux en anglais, donc je le redis en anglais, le knowledge management. On a été un peu limité par le Covid, mais donc là, on va pouvoir, avec une personne dédiée à part entière sur ce rôle-là, faire circuler les savoirs au sein des 12 à 18 pays partenaires du projet. Sur l'ensemble des livrables qu'on a eu, on a conduit plus de 75 appuis en phase 1, ce qui fait plus de 300 documents. Donc on a à nourrir cet échange-là. Mais on a aussi l'ambition d'éclairer les enjeux français et européens avec ce qu'on produit avec les pays partenaires. Dans la mesure où on s'est aperçu qu'il y a un certain nombre de documents qu'on produit avec vous qui n'existent pas en France. Je vais en citer qu'un. On est en train de finaliser une étude sur la place de l'adaptation dans le système éducatif sénégalais, depuis la basic education jusqu'à l'université, en passant par la formation professionnelle. Ce type de document n'existe pas en France. Et donc, on va valoriser ce travail-là avec des partenaires auprès des pouvoirs publics français. Donc voilà, si une dimension aussi importante que je ne crois pas qu'on ait mentionnée jusqu'ici, on a annoncé une extension du programme sur la Méditerranée il y a 3 jours avec un financement européen et surtout avec un partenariat qui est nouveau pour nous avec UNCDF local, que vous connaissez peut-être déjà, qui fait un travail extraordinaire au niveau local, avec un travail de décentralisation des financements et un travail d'accompagnement des collectivités territoriales pour qu'ils construisent leurs propres plans de développement locaux qui intègrent la résilience. Nous, on a essayé de faire quelques appuis comme ça, mais un acteur qui est spécialisé et qui est reconnu avec une norme ISO comme UNCDF local va être extrêmement important pour nous pour travailler sur ce qu'on appelle l'intégration verticale de l'adaptation et qui est une dimension extrêmement importante dans la mise en œuvre des CDN. On va s'assurer avec UNCDF local de travailler sur cet alignement entre les différentes échelles, à la fois en termes de politique publique et en termes de projet. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Wonderful ideas from what you're doing from the Agence Française side. At the country level, at the regional level, is extremely important. I also like this particular point you mentioned about bringing adaptation and so on into the curriculum. at all levels. I think that is extremely important, and also sharing the good practices, also learning experiences that France can also learn from what is happening in Africa and vice versa. And I think we also heard about the importance of having the tools and capacity to be able to support countries with the integration or with adaptation and resilience. And that is why even here at the pavilion a few days ago, last week, we were introducing the Africa Climate Resilient Investment Facility, which is an initiative, again, that we are doing as a contribution to the NDC Hub, where you're supporting the countries with the tools and capacity that they need to integrate climate resilience. Because we know, because we're now going to go to the next segment, which is about the investment, right? And we've heard in the introduction, in the presentation, that Africa has got the lowest amount of investment flows, is extremely vulnerable, is losing 5 to 15% of GDP and so on. So Africa has got huge investments to do to close the gaps, right? But we're then saying at the same time that climate change is impacting Africa and will continue to impact Africa. So I presume that if you have the money, Christophe, you normally not want to put your investments into a place that you know is going to be impacted by climate change, and therefore the investments will become stranded or not returned, right? Therefore, the idea of being able to integrate climate resilience into this investment is extremely important. And that is why, together with African Development Bank, African Union Commission, Economic Commission for Africa, World Bank, African Union Commission, the Nordic Development Fund, we have this facility to help integrate climate resilience. So thank you very much, colleagues, for wonderful insights. Can we please give an applause to our panelists for sharing their great insights? Thank you. And I would now like to, and I would like Bertrand and Lamina to stay, because after the second session, we now have questions and answers for everyone. So if I would like to call my the next panelists to come, where our focus will be on investment, I want to call on Male from the Global Green Growth, the Director of Africa and Head of Programs at the Global Green Growth Institute. Welcome, my brother. Dr. Dauda. Dr. Dauda, who is the lead climate change specialist at the Islamic Development Bank. And Dr. Helen Gichenje. Oh, okay. Dr. Helen Gichenje from the Commonwealth Secretariat. Welcome. Thank you very much. So we've been hearing about the importance of adaptation and resilience, and how the NDCs can be implemented to promote adaptation to build resilience. But we have also been hearing throughout that investment is the challenge. And therefore, that those investments can come if we are able to translate the NDCs into investment plans. So in addition to indicating what you are already doing in your respective organizations to support the work that the NDC Hub is doing, I would also like you to share some reflections on how you see the role of climate finance in helping to translate these NDCs into investment plans. So I'd like to start with you, Dr. Male.
Thank you very much, Linus, and I'm really happy to be here today and also share our work that we are doing as a GGI. So as you rightly put, the investments part is quite important when it's come to helping countries to make the transformation regarding green growth. But the most important part is just looking how they can transform NDC. Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. My apologies, colleagues. I have one of our panelists here which is Amanda McKee. From the NDC partnership. I'm sorry I missed you. So Amanda, please take this. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Welcome. And sorry, Male, for interrupting you.
So welcome, Amanda. So yes, I think when it's come to the NDC, one important part is just how we can translate those NDC documents to a really investment plan that can attract both public sector but also private sector. And when we look at most of the NDC that are already produced by our member states in the country, they only stop when they finish the policy side and not looking for the investment side and coming with the pipeline of project. And our role as a GGI is just really how we can help those countries to translate those ideas to a bankable project that speak the same language, like for the MDBs. And that's what we're doing in certain sectors. For example, we work on Senegal, for example, on the nature depth climate SWOT, right? That's linked also to the NDC to help them to really to see how they can move that element working on red mangrove. Similar aspect, because there is also a lot of need on having a clear long-term development strategy. And most of the long-term development strategies that we have focus on mitigation, which is not the issues of Africa. They need to be adaptation part. So we start, and yesterday there was the launch of the LTLETS document from Ethiopia, so that was validated. We work with Ethiopia and Burkina Faso to have an LTLETS, the mainstream adaptation side. And we realized when we start mainstreaming adaptation, the GDP growth of those countries gain 1.5, which is quite important when they not include the mitigation side. I think it's quite good to have that, and then we're not only limiting on the policy side, but making sure that we will link it to the pipeline of investment. So when you have a good project, that's one thing. But the second thing is just most of the investors, they're looking for de-risk mechanism before they enter, right? And what we're doing is that how we can help to set up a de-risk mechanism that can absorb the first loss and reduce the risk when it comes to adaptation, because most of the investors, they will say adaptation is quite risky, and that's where we need them to put money. So what we're doing is to set up a de-risk mechanism, and we work, for example, for the Africa Finance Corporation to set up a de-risk mechanism that focuses on climate resilience in infrastructure, about 750 million, that support that infrastructure resilience and adaptation. We also work with ECRE, the ECOWAS Renewable Energy Facility, to support mini-grid and access to, let's say, solar irrigation system. We facilitate a go for de-risk mechanism. And last thing also, we is designing at the moment with the Gate Foundation, adaptation acceleration facility that will focus on that part. So those kind of tools is just way to create the bridge between the private sector, but also those projects. And the important part that is missing in this puzzle is that how the government also can play a role by going through a blending finance, using the public finance to attract investment. And the way they can do it is just to have a clear mechanism of transparency that can give also an idea of the private sector, how that money can be used, but also other donors. And that's why we focus on also setting up an MRV system, not only MRV system on the sector side, but also MRV system for the financial side. And the work we're doing in certain countries, just we have a task force within the Ministry of Finance, setting up and helping them to design the right mechanism for green tagging, green taxonomy, and have an idea how much they spend in dollar money. So that investment, as rightly put, is quite important, but we have to build the ecosystem for creating the bridge with the de-risk mechanism, work with the public sector, have a bankable project, but also involve the private sector in the way they can see more advantage on putting money in the adaptation side. So that's the work we're doing as a GGI in Africa.
Thank you very much, Male. That is extremely important, and I really like that figure, 1.5% increase. It makes a credible case for having to invest in this, and not to see adaptation as something that is not bankable, it's not risky, but it's a good entry point that can lead to that. And then, of course, development partners can come with the help with the risking instruments and other mechanisms that could help to make the finance flows to translate the NDCs into investment plans. Thank you very much for that. And you talked about having people placed in different government institutes. Amanda, you do all the same at the Africa NDC, at the NDC partnership. And so you are the head of learning and knowledge and learning. And so I'm sure you have lots of experience that can help us to see what a country is doing to help make the financing happen for the NDCs to become investable.
Thank you. So earlier this year, we launched a finance strategy exactly on this topic. So thinking through how we can leverage the experience and the expertise that we have within the NDC partnership members. We have over 200 members at this point to help bring increased access to finance to countries. And we're looking at this from a number of perspectives, from the perspective of developing countries and what they need, but also from the perspective of the financiers, because this isn't just a question of how developing countries can increase their access, but there are requirements, there are burdens that the financiers need to look at and they need to adjust. And then in the middle, we're thinking about how we can bridge the two. And so Male talked about translating these ideas into bankable projects, and this is exactly one area where we're focusing around investment planning. So how we can work with countries from the beginning stages to think about their NDC and turn that into something that's bankable. And it's not a simple project by project approach. And through the conversations that we've had with financiers, a lot of the challenges that they're facing are more programmatic. They're more economy-wide. And so we've been working with countries to start to get them to think about that and building the capacity within the ministries to set them up for success. So we've put together an investment planning guidance document that's based on a lot of the best practices that we've seen through countries. And I'll admit that no country has done everything that's in the guide, but we have really great examples of each of the individual steps. And so thinking about the institutional arrangements that are needed, about the stakeholders that need to be engaged, at what points, putting together plans for that, the monitoring and reporting, and then looking at the actual priorities. So what is it that, what are the targets in the NDC, and what do you need to be able to implement that? What types of financing is already available? Where are the gaps? What are the risks? What are the mitigating factors for those risks? And then working into the projects and developing that project pipeline. So this is a little bit about what's ahead for the NDC partnership, but we're really looking forward to rolling this out and working with countries.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That is great, and indeed, the issue about institutional arrangements is extremely important because NDCs have to be implemented across governments, across sectors, and so on. Although when they were being developed initially, they might have been focused on one ministry, but now we need a more whole of government, whole of society approach to the implementation, and of course the guidelines become extremely important. So I'd now like to turn to you, Dr. Helen Gichenje, from the Commonwealth Secretariat, also a very strong partner of the NDC Hub, to share with us some of your perspectives about how countries could be better supported to make their NDCs translate into investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for the Commonwealth Secretariat to participate in this event and continue the conversation that started at COP26, also the conversation that happened at Africa Climate Week and here today. Just to touch very quickly on the issues that have been presented to us in the Dahlberg report and how the Commonwealth Secretariat is going to make an effort in terms of doubling down on climate finance, doubling down on the strategies, the implementation and the monitoring, and how we're going to make an effort in terms of the regional programs, the governance and the coordination. In terms of climate finance, one of the key programs of the Commonwealth Secretariat is the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. And through this program, we deploy technical advisors to the country who are embedded within usually the ministries of environment and provide support to government on a very hands-on basis to develop projects, so pushing forward the pipeline of projects, as well as to develop strategies, policies, and frameworks. And through the support that we received from the NDC partnership, I can specifically mention some of the policy frameworks that we've developed in Eswatini and Zambia. In Eswatini, we developed the Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review, as well as the strategy to enhance private sector engagement. In Zambia, we did the MRV of climate finance, as well as the climate finance mapping for NDC implementation. And these are not, static documents. These form the platform in which NDC implementation happens. So for instance, in Eswatini, our advisor there is providing support in terms of the institutional arrangements for the national budgeting process. Our advisor in Zambia, because of his work on climate finance mapping, is now part of the team that are going to develop the green growth strategy. So that's touched on the second component in terms of the doubling down. From the regional perspective, in terms of the regional programs, the governance and coordination, the Commonwealth Secretariat is a partner with the UNCCD as well as the AUDA, NEPAD. And through this tripartite agreement, we are supporting the SADC region on the Great Green Wall Initiative. We heard from the VP of the African Development Bank the importance of sort of these regional programs. So apart from the work that we're doing at the country level, we are supporting sort of the regional programs. And some good news at this COP, the CIF, the Climate Investment Fund, has announced that through the Nature, People, and Climate Program, one of the initiatives that we've helped led the development of is going to receive support. And that is the Zambezi Commission. So 5 countries out of the Zambezi region are going to receive project funds, which will be provided to the African Development Bank to develop a full proposal. So the Commonwealth Secretariat is doing our bit in terms of doubling down on climate finance, doubling down on the regional programs, and doubling down on the development of the strategies, policies, and frameworks that underpin the development and implementation of the NDCs. Thank you.
No, thank you, Dr. Chenjan. I think you guys deserve an applause for the funds from the Climate Investment Fund, so congratulations on that. And I think it was very clear from what you said that your technical people, Amanda's technical people, Male's technical people, that in the countries we are talking together, and I think that's a very good thing, and I think you should all clap for that, because it's very common to see people working in silos, but the fact that in the countries your technical people are working together just shows that together we can really help the countries with the NDCs. So, Dr. AUDA, you are the people with the checkbook, yeah, from the Islamic Development Bank, and you are the people who finally make the monies to happen. So please share with us, I know we are running out of time, but please share with us some of the things that you are doing at the bank and how that can all help us with the investments for the NDCs.
No, thank you. I'm really lucky to come last because I heard about you know, the different issues, and especially when it comes to developing bankable projects. We hear that a lot, and we understand that the NDC planning and the NDC implementation is really something that is learning by doing at this stage, because we are at the first stage and everyone is learning from that process. And you see the risk of having NDC planning and implementation going in silo with national development planning and national investment, which is why when we are supporting countries as MDBs, we have developed the Paris Alignment Framework jointly as MDBs, and the framework is looking at Paris alignment through different aspects, looking at ensuring resilience of our investment, looking at the mitigation goal, but also there is a very important building block of this framework, which is about looking at the upstream aspects, looking at supporting NDC planning, long-term strategies, and all of that. So all of that is linked, meaning that we work with the countries, supporting them, and it's good that Amanda is here with the NDC partnership or with 2050 Pathways platform and other platforms. The role that they are playing in coordinating is very good, because it helps us in supporting the countries in a more efficient way. But there are some issues still, meaning that we would support, for example, the green growth strategy of a country. But what if the same country has a green growth strategy, but also a national development plan, and those two are going in parallel? One is under the Ministry of Environment, the other one is under the Ministry of Planning and Finance. Therefore, it's very difficult to link that with the NDC ambition of the country. So basically, what we are doing is trying to have all of our investment in a country to be linked with the adaptation and resilience and the mitigation goals of the Paris Agreement. And how do you get information about those goals at the national level is through the NDCs and through the long-term strategies. So we have to support both sides, you know, looking at how we invest, but also supporting the planning. We're doing it in a few countries. We have supported Nigeria with the support of the NDC partnership. We also got the information from the NDC partnership about needs from Benin, from Uganda, from Nigeria, and we pledged to support those countries as well. Last thing I want to say is that the reporting that will be done through the transparency framework under the agreement is going to be very important. That reporting that is going to replace the biannual report that happens now will help the countries at this stage, at midterm, through this new NDC phase, to really understand how difficult it is to really translate the ambition put in the NDCs with results on the ground. And we stand ready to support in that aspect as well. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Dauda, and we really appreciate the work that the bank is doing, is helping countries to be more coherent in their investments so that everything is linked, but of course focusing also on the overall goal of the Paris Agreement, which is not only temperature, but also the right to sustainable development and poverty eradication. So we've now heard from our panelists. We have been asked to, we have been thrown out, but I don't think it would be fair to be thrown out before we come to my sister Daisy for her closing remarks. Just one burning question, and then I will ask my sister Daisy to do closing remarks. Anyone burning question? No, wonderful. That means we can now call on my sister Daisy to do the closing remarks. Daisy.
Thank you very much, Linus. I think we have all heard that the NDC is an important document for risk-informed development planning. And of course, it's an investment plan. If we manage to translate it, we need the capacity to translate it to an investment plan. We had two areas where there's a gap. The long-term low emission development strategies, the mitigation long-term planning, and also the NAPs. We've had only 5 LTLEDs and only 16, but we are working on 34. So those building blocks for NDCs are very important. So as we go away, that's the key takeaway as partners. How do we focus on supporting that gap? And linking it to investment, we have a whole panel. We had a whole panel on finance. On governance, I think what the key takeaway again, what we heard from here is this is no longer the moment where we operate in silos as climate scientists and as other development partners. So how do we mainstream NDC priorities in the development process, in national development strategies? So ministries of finance and ministries of planning become very important once we start talking about that. And that's, again, a gap is missing. And we go home thinking how best we work with ministries of finance and ministries of development planning, so that it's part of fiscal planning, climate change. On finance, we also had good ideas, let's say from AfD, that we need to transform our curriculum. That's very important because the dependence on pool of experts, external pool of experts will not take us far. We need particularly a young cadre of experts, let's say on transparency. I'm mentioning areas where we really lack skills in Africa. If that can be mainstreamed in our curriculum, then that will have a huge positive impact. So again, academic institutions become a very important partner when we are talking about this. And we also talked about sometimes one of the strategies is actually we need warm bodies sometimes embedded in ministries. And we had NDC partnership talking about economic advisors, and Commonwealth talking about embedding experts. That's again a very important, we keep talking about access challenges. So I think we have to think differently. Why do we keep talking about the same thing? How do we have some impactful large-scale program in Africa that will help us to have that capacity to develop bankable projects? I'm really worried about this one because I don't know how many COPs and how many forums I've been to, and we keep talking about the same challenge. So I'm just challenging you, the partners of the Africa NDC Hub, to let's see some change. Let's see things happening there. On energy, we talked about having large-scale regional transformative action, and I do agree with that. Desert to power, Africa mini-grids, for example, from UNDP, those are very important. And then, of course, let's not forget our people. 60% of Africa lives in rural areas, so we are talking of off-grid systems. We are also talking about informality in Africa, and I'm glad that Dalberg really presented bespoke solutions for Africa. They considered all that, including the debt burden that we have. And the last thing I want to mention, which we did not really mention as much, is the innovation and technology, digital solutions. I think we have to harness that in Africa, and I hope Dalberg will add a little bit more in their report on that particular aspect. Well, let me, I know people are waiting. Let me thank Africa Development Bank for hosting us as partners. And let me also thank our NDC partnership for coordinating the work that we do in countries. Thank you very much. I want to thank the panelists. We had IFAD, UNFPA, ECOWAS, AfDB, the French organization, NDC partnership, Commonwealth, DGI, and IDB. Thank you very much. I also want to, special thanks to Dalberg. Thank you for a very comprehensive report, and let's hope as partners we are going to dig into it and practice what we preach. I listened to the PM of Barbados, and she said we have the collective power to transform. So it's important as partners. I think together each achieves more. Thank you very much. Thank you, and back to, oh, I forgot to thank the facilitator. Thank you for a wonderful job, Linus. And thanks to everybody for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye.
I'm a writer for AfDB. I just need the names.
Oh, the names of the people.
Yeah, it's quite hard to follow.
Yeah. I can lend you that one. You can.
Oh, I can go with it?
No,
Take
please take
a
a picture. Yeah.
It's about the